Hey guys, this video is sponsored by SteelSeries, so make sure to stick around after the end to find out how you can get a discount on your next order. Imagine if you were someone who went into a coma back in 1998, you wake up now in 2022, your favourite game of all time was Rainbow Six, and after checking out everything else you've missed in the last 24 years, films, music, and Belle Delphine, you find out that Rainbow Six has turned from this into this.
What year is it?
Yeah, this is the point we're at now, where a series that started out so intrinsically complex has now turned into a 3-player co-op game where you have to stop an alien virus by shooting or stabbing everything in sight. It's like going from the Fast and the Furious 1 to whatever they're up to now, watching Vin Diesel getting into a car chase with the cops to seeing him jump a car between skyscrapers. Well, that's where the Rainbow Six series is at with its newest entry, Rainbow Six Extraction, based off the popular Siege event Outbreak, which came out way back in 2018. It's like a weird mix of, obviously Rainbow Six Siege, but then also Left 4 Dead and GTFO, and somehow despite often feeling as wide as an ocean and as deep as a puddle, it still offered up some pretty fun and exciting moments when I was playing it with a few mates.
Wait a minute!
And the irony of playing a game about a virus pandemic the same week that COVID finally caught up on me is not lost here. Right, so Extraction takes place several years after the events in Outbreak, where the nasty Chimera virus has now spread out of New Mexico and found its way to New York, San Francisco, and Alaska, because obviously someone didn't follow the rules and self-isolate. Anyway, Ash is back and she seems to be spearheading this whole operation to try and find a cure for it.
Let's get to work.
Along with other operators, Mira and Thermite taking a more prominent role during cinematics, and although these are often pretty boring to watch, it just makes me want to see Ubisoft make a full-length movie with these characters even more. I mean, a buddy movie with Thermite and Vigil would just make my life complete.
Like I said, cool.
Now, the premise of the game itself is pretty simple, right? There's 4 locations to play through, each having 3 separate areas. You enter an area either solo or with up to 2 other players, and then complete 3 incursions. Now, incursions are submissions, and this might be something like rescuing a COVID-coughing NPC, destroying alien nests, or hunting down elite targets. Then when an incursion is completed, you run to this kind of safe room where there's often ammo and health, and then repeat the same thing 2 more times to complete the mission.
Stellar work. Thanks to your success, we might get additional private funding.
The catch is that with each incursion, the stakes are getting higher and the enemies become more tougher, in theory. A common obstacle is something called sprawl. Now, it's this alien substance left behind by these enemies which seems to slow down your movement speed, and by the 3rd incursion there's going to be more sticky fluids across every surface than there is in your mum's bedroom on a Sunday morning. You can extract at any time, regardless of whether or not you've actually completed the objective, so it starts to kind of add in an interesting dilemma if you've still got a few objectives left to complete, but then you're all low on health points and ammo and struggling to stay alive. The question becomes, do you cut your losses and run, or give the whole thing a final push to try to maximize those gains at the risk of losing your operators? And these are the moments when I think Extraction is really fun, and barely scraping by to that extraction point as enemies are bearing down on you and you've got your last few remaining mags of ammo is just the absolute pinnacle of this experience. That is, of course, assuming you're playing with a bunch of mates, because this thing is incredibly boring solo. It's like being the only person riding a roller coaster or watching a bunch of fireworks by yourself. Now, if you've ever played Rainbow Six Siege, well then this whole thing's gonna feel instantly familiar, because they've more or less just carried across that entire control scheme. That includes running around, crouching, going prone, leaning, and all that kind of stuff. It's all here. You've also got all the same weapons and even some of the same items like flashbangs, impact and smoke grenades, and nitro cells. There's a few new inclusions too though, which have to be unlocked first, like paralysis grenades, which are more or less the same as flashbangs, and even scan grenades, which help to locate enemies through walls. You're limited to taking 1 of each kind here, with the throwable and then some passive equipment, with refills having to be shared with each player in your squad. It's probably not going to be much of an issue if you're playing solo, but I'd imagine that something like that is going to be a nightmare if you're playing solo online, with greedy bitches who are going to grab everything at first sight. And much like Siege as well, I found that droning is just incredibly useful. This starts off with the traditional hold X to scan routine, but you can eventually unlock a drone that auto-scans things in a huge radius. Then at that point, all you pretty much need to do is do a few laps around the map, highlighting everything automatically.
Here's a live. Lure to the extraction point to traffic.
It wouldn't be much fun droning without anything to show for it, so they've made it so that everything that you scan, even if someone else kills it, well, you get a bit of a point bonus for scanning it first. So, yeah, that's nice. Pretty much everything you do in the game here earns you XP points. You get points for killing things, you get points for tactics, which includes like stealth kills and scanning, and then finally you get points for how much health you end a mission with. Each operator starts out at level 1, but can eventually reach level 10 with permanent upgrades and unlocks along the way. Yeah, it's that whole constantly being rewarded shtick that keeps you coming back and playing. And I feel like every time I say I'm just going to play one more mission, I end up unlocking a new gun or something or a new upgrade, and I get stuck in that vicious cycle all over again. I mean, even simpler things like faster movement speed or more damage reduction had me wanting to hop back in just to see it in effect. The difference between a level 1 operator and even like a level 5 or 6 one is just humongous. Humongous. I mean, you go from being pretty much useless to having some crucial upgrades, which makes the gameplay way more fun. There's 4 difficulty modes to choose from, and higher difficulties pretty much require high level operators, or else you're gonna get your shit pushed in pretty damn quick. But with high risk comes high reward, because those harder modes offer up more bonuses to your XP gains. Off the back of that too, I think it is worth mentioning that this is actually a pretty surprisingly challenging game. Even on the default difficulty, it really feels like you just get downed in a matter of hits. And although you can be revived, this can only happen once, so if you go down again, well, then you're buying the farm, bitch. Well, I should say you buy the foam farm, because when you die you get covered in this weird foam looking stuff, and then you either need to be extracted via chopper by any surviving teammates, or if that fails, by a rescue attempt later on. You start off each mission with enemies unaware to your presence, and there is a basic stealth system here, where enemies are going to start to investigate if you're spotted or if you make too much noise. After that, they'll let out a bit of a howl, and then nearby enemies, and more importantly nearby enemy nests, are going to start spawning in constant reinforcements until you take them out. It honestly does feel like a bit of a nest killing simulator at times, and I lost count the amount of these things that I had to stab throughout the course of the game. So if sticking a knife into a bunch of giant testicles is exactly what you were looking for in a game this year, well, then I've got just the game for you. It is a bit weird though how they didn't include the old bar on the screen filling up to let you know when you're getting detected, considering I think every single Ubisoft game made in the last decade has done this. But either way, it's easy enough to tell when shit is about to hit the fan, so I guess that's the most important. And really, I think stealth here is the way to go. Crouch walking around and stabbing things before they've seen you, which is also where I got the whole GTFO vibe as well, combined with that insane amount of damage you take when you get hit. What I really like too is how if someone takes too much damage during a mission, then they become incapacitated and need time off to recuperate, and this right here, man, is some OG Rainbow Six shit. Harking back, even to the first game, when someone could be injured and couldn't participate in an upcoming mission as effectively. Now, I like this because it means players have to rotate operators, so they're less likely to just sit on the same one the entire time, plus it also makes you more aware of the repercussions for messing up during a mission. I mean, if someone took 95 damage during a mission and then you could just use them right away again, well, then there'd be no point to trying to tactically make your way through levels unscathed. You can circumvent this somewhat though. I mean, everyone starts with 100 health points when they're fully healed, but you can buff this up to a maximum of 200. But I mean, at one point or another, someone's going to need some time off for a bit of R&R. Old mate Vigil's just going to have to take some time off by putting that mask back on the mantelpiece and putting his feet up. Then if someone's outright down, you'll have to go back to that area later on and rescue them, and this is its own mission entirely. And if you happen to bugger this up, then you're even given an XP penalty. Yeah, I know, it's actually a pretty ballsy move here, to outright punish and penalise the player for screwing up. Especially at a time in gaming when it seems like it's the norm to just hand over every mechanic to the player with a silver spoon. Extraction does actually scale pretty well for 2 players, and even if you want to play solo, but it is a game obviously designed for 3 players without a doubt. One of the main hazards are spores, and if you don't get these things off too quickly, they're going to explode and cover the screen in, well, yeah, you can see. And the main way to get these things off is to have someone melee them away, and it's obviously kind of hard to hit yourself if you're playing solo. I do want to say too that I think this is also a pretty good looking game. You've got some nice lighting effects and some eerie looking environments here. There's also so many physics effects with the props in this game. Props you don't even have any reason to interact with, but if you want, you can shoot them into individual pieces. And I do think we don't give enough praise to simple physics like this when we really should. Though I do have to say, I didn't know biohazard suits popped like balloons when you hit them. Even just how simply and effortlessly this game pulls off shooting through destructible walls, it all looks amazing and fluid. The soundtrack too is really good. It's like a mix of 80s synth, sounding like something out of a John Carpenter film, before then also kind of tapping into these cliche horror movie motifs, as if you're listening to the backing track for a carnival haunted house. Now, all up, there's 18 operators in the game, which is a fair ways off the current roster in Siege, and still an even more fair ways off the 100 they're planning to add to that game. Thankfully, the recent Overwatch-like hero operators from Siege have been left out of this, and they brought the ones along here who have the somewhat more realistic abilities. You're not going to be running around as Hologram Lady or bursting through walls like the Kool-Aid Man, let's just put it that way. Plus, there's also the absence of long-range operators like Glaz and Carly, which is a good thing, because I think people who hang back and try to score kills over engaging in actual team play are the bane of society. Most of the operators make a lot of sense to be here, and they're exactly what you'd expect to see. Operators like Doc, who can heal and revive teammates, is a bit of a no-brainer. A guy who carries around a gun which can instantly revive down players and also boost their health points. I mean, yes please. Same thing with Rook, who can drop armor plating, reducing the damage everyone takes, and there is never going to be anything bad about getting a bonus to damage reduction. Fink is also pretty useful here too, able to give everyone on the team a shot of recreational drugs that gives you like a 10-second buzz as opposed to a 20-minute one, and you can also revive down players if timed correctly. Pulse is another one that also makes a lot of sense here too, with his heartbeat sensor that shows nests through walls. Then when it's leveled up, it even pings them without needing to be pulled out. At first I thought the absence of shield operators was a bit odd, but then after a while I kind of started to think about it. I mean, if they added in Blitz, Clash, or that French walking tank Monty, well, that really just would have outright trivialized things, so maybe it was a good idea to not include them. I also really like too the way they've modified how these operators work so they fit in with the new gameplay loop. I mean, Vigil, for instance, still has his cloaking ability, but now instead of simply hiding him from security cameras, it now hides him entirely from enemies. When you hit max rank with this guy, it also has the benefit of cloaking other players who are in your vicinity. Now that would be flat out broken in any other game, but here it's immensely useful. Hibana's ability, which you'd assume would have no use anymore, seeing as these aliens aren't really going around reinforcing walls, actually kind of does, because now her gun just works like a remote grenade launcher. And Jaeger's little turret, which was only good at shooting grenades out of the air, is now an actual turret that you place on the ground which shoots at nearby enemies. And I've got to say, this thing tears absolute ass. Now, I didn't level up every single operator to level 10, and anyone who tells you that they did is going to be lying through their teeth. But you don't need to spend a lot of time with them either to see that some of them are kinda pointless and I think really not as effective. I mean, Lord Tachanka, for instance, who's probably just been put in because of his meme status. He has his LMG mounted and loaded, but there's really only 2 objectives out of the 10 or so in the game where you ever actually need to stand still and shoot at things. Ella's back again with her ice cream cone looking proximity mines, and yeah, these are pretty handy I guess, but the other operators can also carry stun grenades, smoke grenades, and paralysis grenades, which more or less offer up the same effect as in mines, and they're also instant.
Don't do away with it like that. You need a sample.
I think Ella's another good example of these mechanics carried across verbatim when they probably shouldn't have been. Her submachine gun, for instance, has that same amount of insane kick that it had in Rainbow Six Siege. Now in Siege, that kinda made sense, and it was justified, because she was a near silent roamer, and coming around a corner to be face to face with her and that gun that fires a bazillion rounds a minute, well, something had to be done to balance it out. So as a result, they made that thing kick like a goddamn mule, but for it to still kick like that in a PvE game, it just kinda seems needless. It's still kinda balanced with the premise that you're using it against another player. The question I pose then is, why would I use her? When I can use Doc, who can support the team with heals and revives, carry a grenade which fills in the same role as her mine does, and use an MP5 that's like a goddamn laser pointer. The way to defend this is because you do unlock other weapons as you level up, and granted, these unlockable weapons I do think are pretty much objectively more useful. All the guns seem to roughly do the same amount of damage, so taking Finker's LMG for instance, which can shoot off 100 rounds before it needs to be reloaded, versus her assault rifle which only has 30, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Just gotta make sure you don't miss time that 4-hour long reload time for the LMG. But it does feel like some of these mechanics from Siege were carried across here a bit haphazardly and without much afterthought. I mean, barricading is the exact same thing. So again, you can reinforce walls or barricade doors or windows, but there's just so few instances when you have to bother. For only, I think, 2 of the objectives, you need to stand in one place. I mean, you're not just going to randomly fortify a wall during a rescue mission, are you? Even then, the areas these objectives take place in are totally randomized, and sometimes you're going to be in some kind of huge ass room with way more soft walls than you've even got reinforcements for. You don't even get any points for doing this, giving you less of an incentive to do so. Certain enemies can easily destroy these reinforced walls, so it really just completely defeats the purpose of worrying about it to begin with. I think the biggest component to Extraction though is its RNG, because although the locations never change, the mission combinations do. And you're really just going to be at the mercy here as to which mission order the game's going to give you. Kinda got to the point where if we got a bad combination of missions, we'd just extract right away, then roll the dice again on another incursion. Aside from that though, sometimes you just get really bad RNG with the enemies. The worst ones by far are the breaches. Now they're these suicide bomber kamikaze type enemies that run right up to you and then explode. And I just can't emphasize how much I hate these kind of enemies in video games. I mean, it's the absolute apex of creative bankruptcy, aside from including maybe turrets. Speaking of apex enemies, there's also an apex enemy in this game, and these are these absolute bullet sponges that constantly spawn in enemies to help them out. It's kind of like the Archviles from Doom, but somehow even more cancerous, and fighting these guys is about as fun as a throat infection. You can cheese through some of the tougher enemy types with the various stun grenades to the point that it pretty much trivializes these encounters entirely. But it's just a bit of a shame how the missions either seem to play to one extreme or the other. It seems we were either totally skating through a mission with no threat whatsoever, or we were barely getting to that next safe room with our pants around our ankles, because we got fucked. By far the worst are the boss fights, which are again totally randomized. Ubisoft have never really been known for their amazing boss fights, and this certainly ain't changing tradition. The concept is pretty cool at least. Now, these are clones of the other operators, and they have attacks depending on the operator that they're a clone of. So there's one based off Sledge who runs around with a giant hammer, the one based off Alibi clones herself again, and you've got to shoot the right one, and then the clone of Smoke leaves a trail of toxic fart gas while he runs around. And it is kind of awesome at first, when you have that realization as to who you're fighting, and it also offers up a pretty cool what-if scenario, I think, showing what it might have been like if these highly trained soldiers got infected by this incredibly hostile virus. A virus that makes John Carpenter's The Thing look like a head cold in comparison. But there's no real meaning to any of them. Don't even unlock anything for doing these. At least if like this was how you unlocked the new operators, it might have actually been cool. Then it might have been actually really awesome going through the ranks and taking on all of these souped up alien clones of the operators. Like a Doc clone would keep trying to heal himself and you'd have to interrupt his animation or something. Or a Vigil clone could go invisible and you'd have to use scan grenades to find him. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. But it's really just about staying mobile and pumping them full of bullets. Now the last thing I want to bitch about is the odd approach that Extraction has for player progression.
Being prepared is the key to adapting to any situation.
Extraction doesn't have missions with an overarching storyline, and you're not playing through any kind of traditional campaign, you're basically just replaying an area over and over, completing achievements to earn milestones. Then when you reach certain milestone levels, you unlock the next area, with there being 4 in total: New York, San Francisco, Alaska, and then New Mexico. Now you can level operators up until the infected cows come home, which is fine if you want to do that, but moving through these milestone levels is the only way to progress through the actual story. Because at key levels you then unlock a new cinematic that shows off some of the main characters, usually just Ash, Mira and Thermite, standing around lamenting how they're gonna fix this whole disaster.
Still have nightmares about it.
And to see all of these and essentially finish the game, you're really doing the equivalent of achievement hunting, which is what the game calls studies. These start off pretty simple, like killing a certain amount of enemies, shooting enemies through walls and all that kind of stuff, but then they start to get stupidly specific. Like getting through an entire incursion with at least 80% health, killing a certain enemy by shooting its pinhole-sized weak spot, or even more specific than that, shooting an enemy's projectile out of the air. I should add, a projectile that it rarely fires. And it goes from being something you can complete by just playing the game normally to something you have to specifically try to get. Now, shooting this enemy's projectile, for instance, was for one of the tougher enemies in the game called a Tormentor. It's an enemy type that turns into Sprawl and then pops out of the ground like a gopher. And all 3 of us had to basically kite it around in this outdoor area. And I mean, yeah, good luck trying to do that in a game with a bunch of randoms.
2 hours later.
And the worst ones by far are these ones that require a specific enemy type, because sometimes that enemy's just not even going to spawn. One of these objectives involves sludge, which is like a ball of toxic shit left behind by enemies. And honestly, I played about a dozen matches in a row before this stuff even showed up. And this would be fine if it was stuff you could do on the side, you know, just to try to collect achievements or something, but you have to do these to progress through the so-called storyline. There's 30 of these milestone levels in total, but the last main thing you unlock is the Sprawl laser, which comes in at level 25. This adds an attachment to your weapon, which instantly melts away all the sprawl you aim at, as opposed to having to shoot it. And I'm going to say too, I think I might be the only person on YouTube that's going to show this thing off too. Anyway, once I'd gotten this thing though, I just kind of found that I had zero motivation to get those last 5 levels, just to reach 100% and see the story come to its cataclysmic conclusion. I mean, all it was likely to be was another cinematic for operators that I wasn't even playing as. It'd be like watching the Death Star blow up in the Return of the Jedi, and then instead of cutting to Luke and the gang celebrating, it shows Captain Akbar and Mon Mothma having a drink together.
Wow, it sure looks cool.
Extraction's endgame doesn't actually take that long to get to, and by the time you hit either, I think it's level 16 or 18, you're pretty much there. And this is really just playing through the same game modes with a bit of a twist on the formula. Here you've got the assignments and then the Maelstrom mode, both of which change every week. The assignment that I played before launch here was called Wall to Wall, and the premise was still completing 3 incursions, but only now before you can move to the next one, you can only unlock the exit through a computer terminal, which then spawns in this wave of enemies. The bonus though is that you get extra XP points for this too, so it's actually pretty worthwhile. But still, just the same key game modes repeated. Maelstrom on the other hand is the same game modes over and over, just now instead of 3 incursions you've now got 9. And then with each new incursion more difficult mutators keep getting added. This is actually kind of interesting though, because it's the same combination every single time. And then it changes every week, being tied to like a ranking system.
That's gold, Jerry. Gold!
On top of that too, you have to play a very preset list of operators, so you can't just cheese through these things with your maxed out Doc or Vigil, at least not this week. So what it means is that every 7 days, you have the potential to be the highest scoring Rainbow Six Extraction player in the world.
In the world.
Yeah, I know, that's pretty cool. Just make sure you put that on your Twitter bio if you ever hit that max rank.
In the world.
But again, yeah, it's still the same game modes, just with a bit of a different twist. And this, I think, is what it all comes down to. How long you're going to want to stick with the same dozen or so missions over and over, and how long you can be bothered to level up new operators. Extraction has the same approach that Siege has to microtransactions, so it only seems to include cosmetics. There's no super powerful BFG 9000 guns to buy, and no way to speed up the leveling process by buying booster packs or something, at least not yet. It's not quite a full price game either, and as far as I know, it's also free for people on Game Pass, so that's an added bonus. Overall, it's not the worst cost of entry for what's otherwise going to be a pretty fun little distraction between other games. And that's really how I'd sum up Extraction on the whole. It's a fun little distraction. Is it an entirely groundbreaking or exciting entry in the series? Well, not really, but the few things it does well. I don't think I had any major game-breaking bugs. I think I disconnected from a match maybe once in the 35 or so hours I played, and I was able to invite friends and be invited without any hiccups whatsoever. It's sad that I have to praise a game for having basic functions these days, but this is the era where it seems that dev release games when they're 80% finished, and then worry about that remaining 20% after launch. Extraction doesn't feel like that to me, and it is kind of hard to fault something that is so great at being good, if that makes sense.
Bring the asset to the extraction pod.
There's far worse ways you can spend time hanging out with a couple of mates, and at least this one doesn't come with the risk of ending up with a tightened chest, a sore throat, and crippling fatigue. Right, so if you're still watching, well, thanks for sticking around, and let me give a final shout out to my sponsor, SteelSeries. SteelSeries makes some of the best gaming peripherals, from headsets, keyboards, mice, and gaming pads, all synced together with a handy program that lets you modify the hell out of them. I'm a bit of a stickler for high quality mouses and keyboards, and whether you're playing a game that's 8 months old or 8 years old, it makes a huge difference in how well something handles. I would never recommend something that I don't use myself, and I'm pretty stoked to be able to offer a discount to people looking at buying some new gear. So just make sure to use that Chad promo code GMAN at checkout to get 12% off your next order. And as always, thanks for watching.